Hi everyone, my name is Grecia and I am the program manager for the digital community at Women Who Code. Today, Mikela Wright, software engineering manager at Capital One, will present us the talk Imposter Syndrome, Lessons Learned from the Cloud. Welcome, Mikela, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm extremely excited to be here and share my professional and technical journey, lessons learned from the cloud. So let's get right into it. My name is Mikela Wright. I am a software and data engineering manager at Capital One in the enterprise data and machine learning space. I support our critical financial applications, and I have a couple of teams of amazing full stack engineers that I lead. I joined Capital One as a college hire through our technology development program. And I'm a certified Amazon Web Services Solution Architect Associate. My alma mater is Virginia Tech, and I'm actually a non-computer science degree major, which will be critical in this presentation. I graduated with industrial and systems engineering and have a minor in business. I am an advocate and I'm extremely passionate about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and promoting STEM programs and promoting kids to join those programs and use technology as a socio-economical tool. And the last bullet, you will see I said I would never code. So I'm a living oxymoron, being that I'm in technology. I am surrounded by code. I love code, and I build applications happily, despite saying I would never code. Today, we will walk through one of my biggest and scariest projects, which was going from on-premise to the cloud. This was a migration and a data transformation. And through this project, I experienced the imposter syndrome heavily. The objective of this presentation is 1, give an engaging presentation, 2, highlight the lessons learned during a cloud migration, and 3, inspire others to conquer the imposter syndrome. This presentation is going to be unique because it is a tech talk and we'll focus on data engineering concepts. However, I'm going to bring in the professional growth from the imposter syndrome that I faced. And throughout the presentation, you'll figure out and you'll hear of how common imposter syndrome is. Here's the agenda. So we're going to have 5 major segments in our presentation. 1, I'll give an intro into what a cloud migration is and what imposter syndrome means. 2, 3, and 4 are major components of a cloud migration. The first component being planning, the second being migration, and then the third being post-migration. And then our last segment will be a review. So let's jump into the intro. To give you some context, in 2015 and 2016, Capital One publicly announced that we were going to be all in the cloud. And all in means all in. A cloud migration is the process of moving business operations, applications, and infrastructure and data into the cloud. On-premise means these are data centers, or another way of looking at it, laptops that you own. The public cloud means someone else owns and manages the data centers. So you can think of it as a laptop that I own, I'm going to move data into a laptop that you own. In this illustration, you'll see the user app experience, you'll see on-premise, and you'll see the public cloud. In this use case, we're moving data from on-premise to the public cloud. So you'll see an arrow that has an X or a red saying that we're going to turn off that connectivity. We're going to turn on the connectivity between the user and app experience to the cloud. And what we are going to be responsible for is migrating all of the data from on-premise into the cloud. So as we're going to focus on the data storage and access tier and the 3-tier architecture framework of an application. There are 3 tiers, which are presentation, or the UI, the application, or the logic, and then the data. So let's role play. Join me as becoming the tech lead for transforming and moving highly regulated and important data from on-premise file servers, databases, and file shares into Amazon Web Services. These are critical accounting applications, and we must get it right. The role as a tech lead is to transform the data and be responsible for delivering the pipelines and patterns to safely migrate this data into AWS. And we must do it on time. Another expectation is to be the subject matter expert of the application data itself. So since these are accounting applications, we have to be a little bit of a SME, a subject matter expert in these areas. That means understanding the compliance, understanding the security needs at both a federal level and a company level. And then you have to be the SME of the cloud. Understand what the cloud architecture is, understand what the strategy is. As the tech lead, we will be leading teams to deliver on this. So let's look at our current experience. And this is the experience from my perspective at the time. I was new to the team. I was the newest member of the team, and I was there for a little under 6 months. So I was new to data engineering concepts. And to give some context, I'm a self-taught non-CS major technologist. So I've already had a little uneasiness about my technical skills as I was entering into data engineering. Majority of my experience was on software-specific builds and commercial off-the-shelf, also known as COTS development. I mentioned that I was the newest member of the team. So that means my experience with the application itself was limited. I did not have a lot of context to understand how the data was being used, who would be impacted if we changed the data. And I joined that team and I was hired to add that tech mindset, and which was one of the key reasons why I was selected for the project. The project lead experience that I had was more lower scale than something as large as a cloud migration for 8 applications. But for the most part, I did have a successful track record at making things complete from start to finish and leading a team. And the scope of this effort was reduced down to 3 applications as the project went on. So as I began to compare my experience to the role and expectations, I questioned, why was I a part of this project? Why am I leading this project? As I said, I'm not an application data SME. I'm the newest member on the team. I'm not a data transformation and migration tech lead. I'm a novice in this space. I understand COTS products, and I am new to the cloud. So this is typical when you're looking at being at the start of the beginning of any technology effort. The unknowns are always going to be vast. And as I compared myself to the role, my confidence went down. And that's where imposter syndrome started to creep in, despite me being excited about this opportunity and despite me having past successes with projects. So what is the imposter syndrome? The imposter syndrome is a feeling of inadequacy that persists despite evident success. Imposters often suffer from self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that overrides any feelings of success or external proof of their competence. At times, someone that's experiencing this syndrome may be able to not internalize how successful they have been, despite what others around them say about them in the field. So here are some imposter syndrome patterns. There are 5 that expert Valerie Young revealed: perfectionist, expert, natural genius, soloist, and superheroes. Perfectionists tend to feel like they need to complete 99% of their goals in order for it to feel like 100% success. 100%, if it's not 100%, then it's failure. They set extremely high expectations. Experts need to know every piece of information. The natural genius, they're the folks that if they're shown something once, they get it. Soloists need to accomplish things on their own to feel successful. And superheroes need to push and work harder to prove their worth. Some triggers that are associated with each of these patterns are as follows. So perfectionists. Remember, perfectionists must hit 100 in order for it to feel like success. 99% of the goals feel like failure. So any mistake feels like a lack of competence, and it may question if they belong or not and cause self-doubt. Experts can be that person that will only answer questions that they know. They will not put themselves in positions of uncertainty. They are uncomfortable with unknowns and not knowing the answer. So if there's a project and they're on it and don't know every piece of information, that's where the feeling of self-doubt could appear. Then you have natural genius. Natural genius is the person that easily attain new skills with little to no effort. So if they have to study a little harder or have an extra meeting to understand something, it can cause them to question their competence on if they can get the job done. And then soloists. Soloists feel like they need to accomplish it alone. They will ask for no help. And when they do have to ask for help, it may feel like they're a fraud, that they could not accomplish it on their own. And superheroes is a little complicated with superheroes because yes, everyone wants to work hard. However, a superhero would be triggered when little external validation for their hard work wasn't acknowledged. So let's say they spent all night to just prove that they want to get this job done. And in the morning, if the praise didn't meet their expectations, they will question their value. So I would love to know if any of you all experience the imposter syndrome, and if yes, which pattern resonates. If you do say yes, you are not alone. Research suggests that 70% of professionals will at least experience imposter syndrome once in their career. And there's another statistics that say that 58% of technologists will experience imposter syndrome in their career. I felt like it was important to speak about this issue in the technology field, especially because some research believes that minority groups are harder hit by this syndrome, because not only do you have to technically, from a skill perspective, on board and become an expert, you may be assimilating into an environment that may not feel as normal or familiar with you as you're in your professional journey. The good news is we're in good company, because even the great Albert Einstein has experienced the imposter syndrome. Here we have a quote from him saying how he felt like his life work made him feel compelled to think of himself as an involuntary swindler. And Einstein's name is still held in high regard today. So the imposter syndrome is more common than a lot of people may think. And throughout this presentation, I'll walk through a way of how to overcome that symptom with the Aspire method. So before doing that, let's dive into the planning phase. So this is the first phase in an overall cloud migration. So let's take in this image and let's go back to being assigned as tech lead for this major effort. The journey begins. Leadership shared the vision and the cloud migration kicks off. In this picture, you'll see two adults walking up a hill. One person has shoes in their hand. The other person has a water bottle. They just make the walk look really easy. Now, if you look further, you'll see a small child lagging behind them, nothing in hand, And if I had to say it, laser focus on each step of the way, I felt like the child in this picture on the migration to the cloud. I was like, where do I begin? The unknowns dominated the beginning. I ended up figuring it out, and I took a step back, and I started with these 3 planning steps. 1, understand. 2, select. And 3, prepare. 1, understand the need of the application, the why. Then let's assess, define, and select the scope of the data migration. Once the scope is defined, let's have a plan for each piece of scope. Here are 6 key takeaways to consider in this planning phase. Unknowns can dominate, but consider understanding your customers. Customers are not only your business, but your internal application customers and those external application customers. Next, identify dependency and scope. So I mentioned that, yes, you can focus on your application itself, but there are users or even systems that use that data. It is highly important in a data migration and dealing with data to understand what those dependencies are. Capture assumptions. Unknowns mean that sometimes you have to make assumptions, and capturing those early and documenting those effectively will help you along the way. Reframe the status quo mindset. So remember, you are moving from on-premise or one framework into a whole new environment. It's important to reframe your mindset to say, this is how we're doing things today, to be more innovative and to be futuristic. You also want to get continuous feedback and approvals in this planning phase. So check back in with your customers, check in with your teammates to make sure that they approve of how you're defining the data, how you will move the data. And most importantly, scale the team to the solution. I experienced where I started with a 2-person team, and by the end of this project, the team grew to up to 7. So keep in mind that as you're going through this journey, you may have to scale the team to the solution based on your timelines. So let's dive deeper. Understanding the customer needs is important before diving into the technical delivery. Sometimes it's so easy, depending on how much experience you have, to feel like, I already know the application inside and out. Let's just go ahead and start moving the data. Slow down. Trust me. Let's identify what you know, and let's identify what you don't know. Ask questions often. I highly recommend even asking questions that you feel like you know the answer to, because business may have a different perception and a downstream application could have a different perspective. Know your business need. So in this migration, just because the application is functioning one way does not mean that it has to follow that same process. You want to determine how the data is being used and where the data is being used. And once you understand that, you could potentially optimize a process. Know the bad stuff of the current state. No matter how much of a technologist or engineer you may be, some processes always have a little hiccup or even have errors that happen on an occasional basis, on a frequent basis. Just know what bad stuff is happening in the current state. Knowing this information will allow you to solution and have a strategy to build in solutions to resolve those issues. And then you can dive into the technical aspects of your use case, understanding your technical stacks, understanding what type of components or services we want to use. Then after understanding all of those needs, you can dive in. So another key point was define. So let's slice and dice the solution. If you look at the diagram, you'll see that data storage, and access was one big chunk of the 3-tier architecture. The larger triangle shows how I broke down that work into, at first, 2 major chunks, which was data at rest and data in motion, and then several smaller chunks, data access, the data in the database, file servers, file shares, the process impact, and then data that was out of scope. So let's get to the bullets. Reframe your status quo mindset. I'm going to be saying that quite often in this presentation, because it's important to realize that you're migrating data into a whole new environment. This is the time where you can modernize tech processes, modernize business processes. In addition, solve a lot of pain points in the existing solution or the existing framework. Analysis can create subcategories. So as you're defining this data and defining the scope, keep figuring out how can you go deeper? How can you create subcategories? Because lumping your work into these major chunks, it will help you manage it throughout the project lifecycle. In this define phase, you turn your assumptions into facts. So keep asking questions, keep seeking answers on turning some of those assumptions into facts. Define what is in scope versus out of scope. There could be many data fields or many functions of an application that is not used or no longer needed that you do not need to migrate over. Defining what is in scope and out of scope will save you time from migrating things that you do not need and solving problems that may not need to be solved. And then last in this key tip is to define and address dependencies. I put a note to say internal dependencies, external dependencies, and outside of company dependencies. Sometimes people think dependencies often touch either a system that is downstream of your system or even upstream, who is giving you the data or the information. But if you do a complete end-to-end analysis of where the data originates from and all potential users, even beyond the application of how they use that data, it'll help you better communicate to the impacted users, define your timelines, and understand what needs to happen before you can do another step. And even outside of the company, you will have to coordinate in some cases with folks that are outside of your organization to get this job done in the data migration. So we've understand the business you need. We've defined our scope. Now let's prepare the strategy. I want everyone to realize that one size does not fit all. So each application may have a different strategy as you're migrating the data into the cloud. Again, have an innovative and open mindset when you're solutioning, and see if you can reuse some components where you can, if timelines are urgent. So selecting the right fit of your solution is key. And here are some migration methods that could differ from application to application that you could use. So rehost. Rehosting is just lifting and shifting the application. So I pretty much take the application as is, and I just put it into the cloud environment. Then you have refactor. Refactor involves logic changes, refactoring the application in the new environment. Replatforming. Replatforming is a combination of rehosting and refactoring. And then you have hybrid. A hybrid method involves having components running partially on-premise and then partially in the cloud. Then you have the replacement method. Replacement method means the application that's as is completely replaced with a new application. So you're not building anything. You're not necessarily refactoring or replatforming, you're installing or implementing a whole new application, and then decommission. The application overall is no longer needed, and you do not need to service or have that function anymore. So in this current project, I used a combination of both. Interim solutions use the hybrid method. There was a point in time where we were considered migrated into the cloud. We had some key services on premise, some in the cloud, which was an interim solution. And then the longer term solution included some replatforming and rehosting. So there's a lot of flavors of methods that you can use, and it's important to understand the strategy that works for the application that you're migrating. Once you get your strategy in place, it is a key to get buy-in and approvals from all parties each step of the way. Review early and review often. I cannot stress this enough. It is important to keep people involved and to feel like, do not feel like you have to be the superhero and do this in a silo. Make sure that you clearly capture and communicate your logic and reasoning when making decisions with assumptions and unknowns. So if you had to make a decision to transform the data from an A type to a B type, document that. So if you have to go back in the future and explain why, it's already there. And even though this may seem like a common sense concept to document and to communicate, you'd be surprised at how sometimes the timelines can make this documentation step slip your mind. So I want to stress, in a migration and something as large and critical as moving from one environment into a completely different environment, is really important to have those steps in that thought process captured along the way. And then create a cross-functional review culture. Sometimes in technology or in whatever profession you feel, you may have to feel like you have to have a meeting with the business or the meeting with cyber, a meeting with compliance, all separately. I realized and learned throughout this journey to the cloud that bringing all of those people into one meeting brought up different parts of the conversation. And not only does it bring up different perspectives, it caused us to be able to solution a lot faster and a lot more efficiently because we had all of the right players in the room. Again, I've said this before, continuous feedback and approvals is important in this phase as well, to consider that. And have a backup plan. So you have your key strategy. Once everything is approved, as the tech lead, think about what will happen if some data was missing. Migration is terrifying because you don't want to lose any data, and you don't want to transform data in a way that it will negatively impact the business application and your users. So have a contingency plan. This is key. So I shared that whole first phase of the migration. And was I triggered by the imposter syndrome? Yes, yes, yes. The trigger and the pattern that I felt the most was the expert. And that was because, like I mentioned earlier, all of those elements of where I was with my current experience, I just felt like it was a huge gap. And having this feeling, I said, I want to solve the imposter syndrome in the same way as I would solve any other problem. And that's where the Aspire method came to play. Aspire is a method or a mantra to help you shift your perspective from feeling like an imposter to being an asset. Aspire is an acronym, and it came to me because I sat there one day and said, I want to aspire to get through this feeling. I have to deliver. Everyone believes in me. So now I need to shift my mindset to make sure that I see myself as an asset. So 1, A stands for acknowledge how you feel. S, shift to the positive. P, pinpoint the trigger. I, identify the solution. R, reframe the mindset. And E, execute your plan. Here's an example of one of this is the first time that I applied this method to overcome that first feeling of can I do this? This seems like so much. Do I really want to be in data engineering? I took that expert pattern and I applied the Aspire method to it. So here's what it looked like. On the far right are the steps broken into more of what I was experiencing. So A, acknowledge the feeling or acknowledge how you feel. I felt underqualified for such a high visibility and complex effort. So then S, shift to the positive. So this is a great professional and technical opportunity. I have a great track record of completing complex projects. Okay, now that I shift to the positive, let's pinpoint the trigger. So the lack of information about the overall project caused me to feel a little uneasy, and lack of information aligned with the expert pattern. So then let's identify a solution to overcome the lack of information. So I set up time with SMEs, also known as subject matter experts. I said, I'll ask a lot of questions and I will get comfortable learning again. R, reframe the mindset. One of the key things in technology that will always happen is you will have to learn. And learning is new, learning is normal. And I had to remind myself and reframe the mindset to say that this is completely normal. And, you know, it's okay to not know everything as the leader of this project. And then I executed the plan. I met with my manager, I set up meetings with stakeholders, and I started to communicate in a way of saying, this is the information that we need and I need to get started, and started to navigate. And it boosts my confidence using this method, just having a clear plan on how I would execute things further. So after I got over the imposter syndrome jitters and I did the planning phase, I had more confidence going into the migration phase. Here are 4 key tips and learnings that I had during the migration phase. I learned that data quality and compliance matters. Yes, it matters, but I really understood how important it was during this migration. It's important to know how data should be classified and defined and aligned with industry, government, and company regulations. It's also important to test end to end. So you'll see I titled that bullet end to end or bust. Your data needs to reconcile. The function of the application needs to act the same and process the same before and after the migration to the cloud. Test in all of the environments and all of the regions. I should have made this red because this is really key to test end to end. Another key learning was to build great pipelines. And again, all pipelines may not be one size fit all. So make sure you build them scalable, reliable, and reusable when possible. And then last, we have be agile, adjust, and communicate. Throughout this process of migrating from on-premise to the cloud, we had to be agile based on the findings that we had, based on the different timelines that we had. And we'll dive deeper into what that means. So building great pipelines means making sure that it's available. So it's always up, is reliable, is reusable, and is scalable. In the cloud enables you to build certain platforms that you could, let's say, for example, if you see in this diagram, you have extract, transform, and load, also known as ETL. If you notice patterns with certain data that has operation 1, operation 2, and operation 3, you can reuse that with other data types that you've identified, which can save you time and increase your accuracy of how you're processing your data. Before you build a pipeline, check and see if anyone else within your department, your team, or even the company has built something similar. When you have a migration and when timelines are urgent, it's important to see if you can reuse before you reinvent the wheel or start building again. And then last is understanding an interim solution versus a long-term solution. A lot of situations may require an interim solution or the hybrid migration method, which is pretty much having part of the process running in the cloud and part of the process running on premise before the final long-term target solution is in place. When you're building your pipelines in an interim fashion, still keep in mind what you can build for the future state. So when you cut over completely, you have less rework to do. Compliance, quality, and testing. It is very important to have quality data at the start of your migration. I even recommend, as a part of your define phase, to really understand what your test data will look like in the early stages before you get down to building and implementing. Starting with accurate, compliant, and quality data ensures you that in those development and quality assurance environments, you've already had a lot of test runs on what the actual future state or the production environment will entail. Make sure that you prepare to adjust your design and your schedule as needed, because data preparation takes time. If the test data is not there, you want to have time to get all of the test data that you need, clean it, remove any sensitive data, and make sure that there's no defects that's caused by the test data. And do not slack on end-to-end testing. End-to-end testing means if you going from the very first step and following every single task all the way into the end user. End-to-end testing in a cloud migration is key. And I highly recommend, and I've learned to not skip any of those steps or not make assumptions that just because something worked before, it'll work the same. So test with your external partners, test with dependent applications and your business users multiple times if you can. So building great pipelines in the cloud involves you using services. So at Capital One, we primarily use Amazon Web Services as our cloud service provider. Here are some of the services that I used in the pipeline. So for compute and analytics, we have Lambda, EC2. We use step functions in the EMR. For storage, S3 or Amazon Simple Storage Service was heavily used, and even RDS. For networking, it's important to have VPC, CloudWatch, and AWS IAM. Your solutions may require different services, but it's very important to remember constraints. Here's an example. In the compute, Lambda is serverless, and that means that it's completely housed in the AWS environment. For the most part, Lambda has a constraint of 15 minutes. So if you were to assume that Lambda can process all of your data, and if you have a service that exceeds 15 minutes, Lambda will fail. So you will have to use and look at other compute that can handle those process time constraints and different things like that. So just remember, one size does not fit all. Just because one part of your data migration process can leverage Lambda, doesn't mean that all of the data processes or different types can use Lambda. And last, our post-migration. So we've created our data pipelines. We're now comfortable with using AWS. Let's look at the key learnings from the post-migration. Validate and check it twice or more and get sign off from users. Post-migration means that we've successfully built the pipelines and we've migrated the data from on-premise and it now lives in AWS. Don't rush the process, run in parallel. So what parallel means is you can have the processes still operating on on-premise servers and in the AWS cloud or whatever cloud provider you use at the same time and compare results. That is what I mean by validate and check it ties, and don't rush the process. Third, we have document the bugs and the learnings. Document, document, document. This is key to, as I mentioned before, showing that thought process and helping with debugging even future issues that come along the way. And the most important thing is to remember that the journey is just beginning. Once you migrate the data into the cloud, your applications in the cloud, the real fun begins. And you can explore all of the amazing things that cloud services have to offer. So, did I experience other imposter syndrome patterns along the way? Yes, I did. It's actually common for people to experience different patterns depending on the experience that they have in that moment. So earlier, at the beginning of the project, I had the expert pattern, and I aspired through that using the aspire method. Later, I experienced the perfectionists and the superheroes. Since this was such a critical project, I just really put a lot of pressure to make sure that we had everything right. And over time, I realized that getting things wrong in testing is what's expected. That's why it's testing. And then the superheroes, feeling the need to actually have to overwork, make sure we hit the deadlines, make sure, since this is a high visibility project, I'm going above and beyond to prove that this is why I'm worth it. The thing about a reason why I was selected for this project is because I have the ability to run things in parallel, break things down, and pay attention to detail. Me putting in extra hours, yes, sometimes that could be needed, but that does not align with the value that I add to the project. And that's important to keep in mind when you're conquering the imposter syndrome. So now let's review. In this presentation, I walk through the 3 major segments of a cloud migration: planning, migration, and post-migration. Under each of these segments, you'll see the key tips and learnings that I had throughout the way. I'll highlight a few of them. So in the planning phase, it's really important to understand your customers and identify your dependencies. Reframe the status quo mindset as soon as you can in the process. Also, get continuous feedback at the start of the project so you do not have to worry about that later on. In the migration phase, one of the top recommendations and learnings is to end-to-end test or bust, and to make sure that you have quality and compliant test data as early in the process as possible. When you're building great pipelines, make sure you keep in mind that one size does not fit all, and that you consider constraints of the cloud services as you're deciding which service to use for your pipeline. In the post-migration, validate, and check it twice or more. Get sign off from users and do not rush the process. I'll give you a quick story about a parallel run that we had. We got the data migrated into the cloud, and it was running side by side with the on-premise process. We went months and weeks and days with having no issues. However, this process was quarterly. And once the quarterly came around, we discovered some new findings between the on-premise and the AWS, that had we rushed the validation process, we may not have caught. So do not rush the process. Keep in mind on when processes run, and document your learnings and your bugs. And most importantly, Remember that the journey in the cloud is just the start of the journey. Most importantly, I want to focus on the Aspire method. Aspire is a framework or a method to help bridge the gap between the role and the expectations. Imposter syndrome are the feelings of inadequacy that persist despite your evident success. Make sure that you acknowledge how you feel, you shift to the positive, you pinpoint the trigger, you identify the solution, you reframe your mindset, and you execute the plan. I've shared this method with others, and they have shared how they were able to overcome the feeling of self-doubt throughout their career. And just realize and remember that technology is ever changing, is ever advancing, and it is okay. And you will aspire through those methods. You will aspire through those times where you may have self-doubt. So I encourage all of you to aspire through and push through whatever you're going through. And thank you for listening to me as I journeyed to the cloud and shared both the technical lessons and the professional lessons that I learned along the way. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I am really excited and honored to speak with Women Who Code. Thank you for having me, and thank you for watching. Have a good one.